Hello and welcome back to Your Hobby Connection. I'm so glad you're back. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the Lionel triplex video. So today we're back with the Lionel catalog going over the 2024 Big Book. So on the opening cover we'll see that they are celebrating 20 years of the Polar Express. So let's grab our golden ticket and let's believe we can afford these trains. First up we have the opening pages showing the beautiful 20th year anniversary steam locomotive in blue for the Polar Express. I've got to admit, I kind of like the color. It really works for the locomotive. And on the left hand side, as you'll see, we have what we can expect to see. Moving on, we're going to see a sneak peek of the Hiawatha and Milwaukee Road locomotive and some of the features that it comes with. And of course we have their Vision Line triplex. I did a video on this, so if you guys want to jump to that video, I'll have the link posted above. You guys can jump to that video and learn all about the triplexes. But they've done a really good job of giving a basic explanation and stuff like that. The one thing that I will note is I think that they did a much better job with the triplex in their own catalog that just focused solely on that locomotive, because it did have video links and the explanation of the features that you can see and use and watch, which is really cool. On a side note, one of the things that I did not talk about in my original triplex video that I will tell you guys about now is the Virginia locomotive. Yes, I mentioned it was a 28884 and it was the number 700 instead of the 701. What I forgot to tell you is when the Virginian built it, what its specs were, and a little bit of the story behind it. So, it was built in late 1916. Actually, that was when it was ordered. It didn't get delivered until mid-1917, I do believe. It had 13,000 gallons of water capacity, 12 tons of fuel, weighed 1,162,686 pounds, and it had a tractive effort of 186,975 pounds of tractive effort. That's over 10,000 more pounds of tractive effort than the original Erie locomotive had. So, what got it that extra power? Well, it had a larger boiler and smaller cylinders. Why did they order this? Well, the Virginian Railroad wanted a locomotive capable of pushing over 2,000 tons of freight at 10 miles an hour over their 2.07% grade. Well, this is where the locomotive was an absolute, utter failure. This guy, right here, only managed 5 miles an hour over the grade, pushing that kind of tonnage. Anything above 5 miles an hour and it ran out of steam, it would have to stop and rebuild it. So it was an absolute failure, even more so than for the Erie. So the Virginian Railroad said, you know what, screw it, we're done with it. So they took the locomotive and they made two out of it. And they had one as a 2880, so they took the locomotive and boiler and they just said, bang, we're going to cut this section off right here. And then they took the wheel set under the tender and made it its own, a 282. So the good news is, it survived a lot longer than the original triplexes of the Erie, which were scrapped in 1929. Those two locomotives were scrapped in 1953. So, in some sort of the word survived, it may not have survived as a whole triplex locomotive, but the majority of the running gear and the boiler and tender survived until 1953, which it was then scrapped. Moving on, we have the triplex superset. This is one of the things that I kind of want to buy. I'm also torn on buying the Denver and Rio Grande triplex locomotive myself. So I'm kind of like, do I buy one? Do I buy the locomotive and the superset, or do I just buy the locomotive? So I got some things to think about. You know, can I afford over $6,000, almost $7,000, just for those two things, or do I go with a legacy locomotive that we're going to be talking about right here? All Lionel legacy locomotives are equipped with the fan-driven smoke unit, the legacy control, the Bluetooth control, the maintenance-free motor, the track IR, and the legacy rail sounds. Now, the cool thing about the legacy control is it works with your conventional, it works with your TMCC, your Cab 1L remote, your Cab 2, and the new Cab 3 coming out. So it will work in any form of those, and because it also has Bluetooth capabilities, you can directly link to it with your phone. So if you don't have the Cab 3 or Cab 2 yet, you can automatically talk to these locomotives and run them. So that's beautiful. It also has die-cast metal trucks and tender. It has traction tires, illuminated cab. It has the quilling whistle, the Dynachuff smoke effects, or sorry, sound effects. So the locomotive's working really hard, you can make it work really hard with the sound. And if it's working really little, you can make it work really little with the sound of the locomotive. It does have bicolor illuminated classification lights where applicable. It has directional lighting. If it has the light on the locomotive for the head end and the tender, the lights will switch when the train changes directions. So if you're running it backwards, or turned around running backwards, you can do that. They also have what appears to be two types of couplers. The default setting, which is the scale coupler, which you can't use for the big trains, and it has the non-operating actual coupler, so you can double head it or pull the train backwards with the tender first. Now, moving on, we have the Berkshire class of locomotive. These beautiful locomotives were made by the Lima Locomotive Works in drumroll please, 25. And this was the Chesapeake, Ohio, number 2786. And as you can see, it's a beautiful locomotive. Now, these Berkshires were built for the Boston and Albany Railroad. They got their names because the Boston and Albany tested them out on the Berkshire mountain range where they were running their big freight trains. They were also for passengers, but most of the time they were mixed service, passengers and freight. These guys were the workhorse of that era. From 1925 to the end of the steam era, 600 were built, and we even have cool operating exhibits today. Now, unfortunately, because the 600 that were built, there's only a handful, as a matter of fact, only 3 that I could find survived to the preservation era. Now, there might have been more, might have been less, but I only focused on the 3 that were preserved on the Lionel's page here. And those 3 survivors were the 755 Nickel Plate Road, the 765 Nickel Plate Road, and the Pierre Marquette number 1225. Those 3 made it to the preservation era. And of those 3, the 765 and the 1225 do operate under tourist operations. So, one other thing to note is, all of these locomotives, all the Nickel Plate Roads, the Chesapeake, Ohio, Detroit, the Toledo, and Ironton, and the Pierre Marquette, all served their roads and those road names. So none of this like, oh, well, 1225, yes, there was a Pierre Marquette number 1225, but it was actually number 1220, not 1225. And the 1225 was a different locomotive. Things like that. So these locomotives all served, they all operated on the same railroad. These guys are about $1,700. They have an 054 minimum curve required. They do have the whistle steam effect, so that is beautiful. They also have specific road details. So if you'll look at the Nickel Plate Roads, you've got 2 headlights. One looks like a Mars light. And if you look at the Pierre Marquette, it doesn't have that extra headlight on top. Same with the Toledo Detroit. They've also got some different detailing. And then the biggest change with the C&O, where the headlight was sitting on top of what looks like looks like it's sitting on top of the steps there, almost. Whereas the other ones are mounted right onto the face of the locomotive. So it gives you that extra bit of detail. Now, we have the H7 class locomotive. Fun thing about these locomotives is that they were what some people would call a simple expansion, but they are actually compound initially. They were originally built in 1909 for the Union Pacific or Southern Pacific, depends on the sources you find, but they are built as 2882s. So once again, Lionel is rolling out some really big power this series, because in 2023 they rolled out the big boy, which was the 4884, completely high pressure on both cylinders. Then now this catalog, they've rolled out the triplex, which was a big powered compounding steam locomotive, Mallet style. And they've included in this catalog as well the beautiful h7's. Some of these will be nicknamed the Chesapeakes because of the Chesapeake in Ohio. The C&O used a lot of these locomotives. Not as many as the N&W, Norfolk and Western, but they used a lot of them, so that's where they got the nickname the Chesapeakes. So, just like the triplexes of old, these guys were coming around the same time as Mallet, and they had the high pressure cylinders on the back, so, 300, 200, 300 pounds of pressure coming in here. They'd exhaust that to the next set of cylinders, and when those cylinders exhaust, they'd exhaust to the smokestack and the steam chest. So, again, that's the Mallet style. They were kind of hinge pinned in the center there. So, articulating Mallet style with high pressure and low pressure cylinders. The locomotives that were bought and built for UP were done by Baldwin initially. They had 9,000 gallons of water. Not a whole lot of water for a big stinking locomotive like these guys. It had 10 tons of fuel, and the locomotive and tender weighed 600,000 pounds. And it had an initial tractive effort of 94,000 pounds. So, fun fact, I did do some research on the Chesapeake and Ohio locomotives right here, all 4 of these. So, if we'll take a look at some beautiful photos here, here's the Chesapeake and Ohio at number 1584. Now notice how her tender looks. Pretty darn good if you ask me, right? Well, 1584, it's this guy right here. And it has the exact same tender, and it's the exact same road number that I was able to locate a photo for you guys. So I thought that was pretty awesome right there. The cool thing is the 1572 and the 1553, both of them had the same tender and everything. The vandy tenders were the same sizes right there. The other tender, the shorty, I could not find any photos or verification of the 1564's tender, but it's cool to have that variety of a really big tender on some locomotives and a small tender on other locomotives. Just kind of gives it that definition of change and differences. I don't think the C&O with the coal bunker like that down here, the number 1584, I don't believe that's a depleting coal load, which I kind of feel would be nice to have on a legacy locomotive. If they've done it for the Vision Line Big Boy, it would be kind of cool if they would kind of implement that into the other steam locomotives, especially if it's a really big tender. That's just my opinion. I could be mistaken in my thoughts on that one, but it would be cool to have that. That being said, we also have the DRG, which did quite a few of those 3600 series. And here we have the DRG locomotive right here. And as you can see, there is a bit of a difference between the one that Lionel's got and the one that we see in the real life photo here. As you'll notice, it does have the doghouse. It's hard to tell if it has the raised peaks on the front and back for the tender's coal bunker. Can't really tell. This one also looks a little bit bigger if you look at it. It looks a little bit bigger in the catalog than it does in the real life photo here. That's 3615, which was a sister to the 3605. And then of course you have the RMP number 1. Pretty cool locomotives. So, that being said, I did quite a bit of research on these locomotives because I was curious as to what was what and who all was real. So, as I've mentioned, we have the C&O, we'll go with the 1572, which also, I did find a photo, but I don't have enough space to show it right now. It did have the tendered lettered 1572. That locomotive was the second run of 20 that was ordered in 1926. Then the C&O 1553 was ordered in December of 1923, and the first set of 25 that was ordered. And then the 1564 below it was also the first run of 25 ordered in December of 23. Apparently these were really big successes because, again, the 1584 was ordered in 1926 on the second run of 20 that they had ordered. So the C&O ended up, at the very minimum, with around 45 or so of these locomotives. Big power, big awesome stuff. So the DNRG number 3605 did serve under that name, it did serve in the Rio Grande, and it was ordered in 1927. And like I've notated, the tender's not 100% correct, and there are some other details that people may or may not care about that may or may not come through on the models here. It's pretty cool. I'm personally into getting this locomotive because how many times do we see a locomotive with a doghouse tender on it? That's what they call this right here, the doghouse, a little brakeman shack to sit in, basically. The RFNP, which is the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad, that locomotive did serve on that railroad. The hard part for me is I could not find the number. I believe it's number 1 as it was in the real life version that it ran on, but I can't tell you because I can't find that information, unfortunately. The sources are very scarce on the road power and what all is running. Now, that being said, I do have a bit of a unique story on the UP 3500 series here. Truth be told, yes, Union Pacific did order 6 of these compounding locomotives as a 2882. Now, that being said, they only ordered 3 for themselves, and then 3 more between Southern Pacific and some of their not Southern Pacific, I'm sorry, some of the subsidiary railroads that they worked with ordered 3. They owned 2 of the railroads. One ordered 2, one ordered 1. So they only ended up having 3 locomotives ever. But here's the kicker. The original series that they ordered were the 2000 to 2002, and they were introduced in 1909. But the 3500 series was a renumbering of the locomotives. So what that means is they ordered a bunch of 2880s, not 2882s. So these are the 2882 styles. But the Union Pacific ordered a bunch of 2880s, and they were the Malay compounding. And they said, we're going to simplify these guys, we're going to straight pipe, high pressure cylinders, front and back. And then when they did the conversion to all those locomotives, they renumbered them to the 3500 series. So you're going, okay, I can forgive, 2 trailing trucks not being proper, but the numbers ran from 3500 to 3569. So the 3500 series did run. 3589 and 3592 did not run. I could not find a locomotive in the steam era that was a 2882 or a 2880 numbered 3560, anything above 3569. So unfortunately, that's where Lionel either didn't do the history research or said, meh, we like 3589 and 3592. Don't know, couldn't tell you. One last cool fact is the last 2882 to run was on the Norfolk and Western Rails in 1962. Yeah, we're talking almost 8 years, almost 10 years on some railroads cases, before the major shutdown of steam on all railroads. They were still running them for that much longer. And, as a matter of fact, N&W built the last 2882s in 1948 to 1949. So, yeah, the N&W loved theirs. There's the Y6Bs and the Y6As, and those locomotives still are in preservation to this very day. Now, we're moving on to the beautiful 10-wheelers. These were the 460s. Now, as you'll notate, these are the locomotives that were for the New York Central based on the F12 class. But, in my researching, I found out that the first ever 460 10-wheeler was built in 1847. That's right, 1847. And they were built by Norris Locomotive Works for the Reading Railroad. And if we take a look at this beautiful photo right here, this was a Denver Rio Grande 460. This one was about 1888, 1887, somewhere in that range. I couldn't find any other things that were close enough that were authentic photos, and a lot of them are recreations, if at best. Now, mind you, this is probably going to be a narrow gauge locomotive, but they were still small even by comparison of the 1890s to the 1920s. So, lot smaller locomotives. They've been around for, oh my god, almost 100 years by the time the steam era was winding down. They had a claim to fame for the Illinois Central Railroad, number 382. And that was in the wreck of Casey Jones. And that wreck happened on April 30th, 1900. And he would have been driving a locomotive pretty similar to this. Not exactly. It would have been a lot younger, because these were around in the 1912s. But it would have been a cross between this looking locomotive and this one right here. So it would have been bigger than this, but just a little bit smaller than this guy right here. So that being said, what is the 460 from the NYC's F12 class? Well, they were the 1912 locomotives, and the NYC built their own 460s. So the builders were the NYC themselves. They had 7,000 gallons of water, 12 tons of fuel, a full locomotive weight and tender of 361,300 pounds. They had a tractive effort of 31,004 pounds. So they were great yard engines, and they were great prime movers for small freight trains going and doing local deliveries. Definitely not the Berkshire main road power for getting trains from one side of the country to the other, and they lacked the kind of power you need for the big heavy freight trains of the 288, 287 classes. Now, going through all of that, I did do a bunch of research on these locomotives, and I found some interesting information about them. One thing's for sure, the New Jersey Central number 185, that road number did not exist for this type of locomotive. The early years, early 1840s to the 1880s, I do believe, was numbers 150 to 184. And then in the later years, like late 1880s to mid to early 1890s, somewhere in the 1900s maybe, they had 400 to 424 with the road numbers. And then the modern, early 1900 to late 1940s, they had the numbers of 750 to 789 in the 460 class. So unfortunately, number 185 did exist as a road number, but it was a 480. It didn't exist on the real railroad as this class of locomotive. So that's kind of unfortunate that Lionel, didn't choose that. If I was Lionel, I would have probably picked either the 700 number series or the 400 number series. Me personally, because I know in that time frame they ran the more modern F12 style locomotive for the New Jersey Central. So that's kind of a cool locomotive, but missed opportunity on the number. I love the paint scheme on it though. The blue's pretty cool. The New York Central and Hudson River Railroad, number 2140, did run. As a matter of fact, that locomotive number did exist. However, it existed in 1886. So this locomotive is very, very modern by almost 30 years modern. Actually, it's closer to 40 years, but who's counting, right? So it's a very modern locomotive for the original year that this locomotive's number ran in. The number 1244 from the New York Central, it did run. This one was done in 1907. So it's about 5 to 7 years ahead of what it originally would have come out as. So New York Central definitely had a 460 in that class number, but it was the earlier version of a 460. And then you had the Northern Pacific 1372. I could not find a specific date for this particular locomotive's runtime. I do know that they had the 1372 running with their train sets. So it did exist. the Western Pacific number 110 never existed. They had the 71 to 106 numbers and the 121 to the 122. So unfortunately, this is also one of those lost locomotives. A beautifully done, magnificent locomotive. Unfortunately, it wasn't done in that 110 road number. But they did exist. And if we'll see right here, we do have the New York Central. So this is what I was able to find. As you notice, we had a little bit of a variation between the Pennsylvania, which is another one that had the 460 series. Its steam dome and its setup was a little bit different than the New York Central right here. So pretty cool stuff going on there. And that's it for this video so far, ladies and gentlemen. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys come back for the next one, where we're going to start talking about the Royal Blue Line and the Hiawatha 442s. I do plan on bringing out some cool information about those guys. So, make sure you guys like the video, subscribe, share it with your friends and family, and then come on back and watch out for the next video that we're going to be doing.